You're listening to the Identity Sports Podcast, where we dive into the world of faith, sports, and inspiration with athletes from across the country. I'm your host, Zach Vogel. Welcome back to another episode of the Identity Sports Podcast. We're joined here today with a very awesome former MLB pitcher, Russ Ortiz. Russ, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I have to say, for the Oklahoma listeners, we got a Oklahoma alumni over here. So can we get a little Boomer Sooner?
Oh, Boomer Sooner, baby.
There we go.
Love it.
Yeah, so 1994, College World Series. But before we even get into that, you're a California kid. What led you to Oklahoma, of all places, for college?
My high school pitching coach, he coached in college at Pepperdine before he came to our school and became our pitching coach. And so he had relationships with a lot of coaches, and the coaches when he was at Pepperdine were at Cal State Fullerton ended up being the Oklahoma coaches, the ones that I had. So when it came time for me for recruiting and trying to figure out what school, that I could potentially go to, he said, "Hey, what about Oklahoma?" And I honestly, at that time, I was like, I'd never even heard of Oklahoma baseball. You heard of Oklahoma football, Oklahoma basketball. And so he's like, yeah, he goes, they have these coaches now. He's like, they're awesome. My pitching coach, he, as far as I can tell, he's the only Christian person that I really got to know my whole life up until that point. And so he made a really big impact on me. I wasn't a Christian then, but he made a real big impact on me, the way that he cared for us, the way he pushed us, the way that he just loved on us, and also helped set my foundation for pitching. And so when he said, "Hey, I think this would be a great place for you," it was like, I trust you. And so it ended up working out, going there, and it was all based off of his recommendation, his relationship with those coaches, and they trusted him as well. And so it was great. I went on a recruiting trip, didn't do anything. I hung out with one of the current players, and we literally just hung out and I think we went to a movie, but a bunch of sports were out of town on the road trip, and so there was nothing going on. And so I think we went to a movie and then just went back to, he was an older player, so he had an apartment, and we just went back and just hung out and just talked. But oddly, I was like, this is great. Like, this is really nice. And I didn't know what to think, like what I wanted out of a college, but it was just the feeling of being there and how easygoing it was. The feeling of just being there and just felt relaxed, and everybody says hello and all that stuff. Not used to that in Southern California, And so when it came time, I was like, this is where I want to go. And so it was a great, everything happened there. And I look back and I'm just like, it all started because of my high school pitching coach, who is a believer. And he, the way that he lived his life, the way that he made such an impression on me that built trust for, in him to say, "Hi, I recommend this." And I could trust him, kind of leading me that way. And, and then from there, every good thing that happened to me, happened there. After high school, and so it's just, so it makes me think about those types of things. So when I guess have stale moments in my walk with the Lord, or frustrating moments or whatever, those are times that I revert back to and thinking like, man, okay, this is how I know that God's hand was right there with me, that he was, I could, going forward, I can trust whatever he has for me, because back then he was helping to orchestrate all of this to get me where I needed to go to, which going to Oklahoma is when I first heard the real gospel. And then had some great experiences there and met my wife there and all that stuff. So I have those times of where I'm just like, gosh, I don't know, just something is just stalled, and I think about that, and it's just like, man, I that's another example for me to like, I can fully trust that God is right there with me because he was there with me before I had given myself to him, and so so I use that as an example of as an encouragement for me, and then if I share that encouragement for others, as well, to let them know, it's like, man, if I'm sharing my testimony with somebody and they don't know the Lord, maybe it can encourage them to let them know it's like God's actively working right now. The fact that I'm even here sharing with you, and I'm here usually because I played Major League Baseball. That's really the honest truth, is why a lot of times I'm somewhere sharing my testimony. And that all lines up with, given the gifts to play baseball, and then had the right coaches, and especially my high school coaches, to mold me into what I became, set that foundation. And I'm just like, the people that God put in front of me, you can see how that impacted my life. And so like, that's the neat part about sharing testimony, which I've gotten to do tons of times, which has been awesome, is knowing like my testimony could impact someone just like my pitching coach's life testimony did for me, and then also everybody at Oklahoma.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and it's not even necessarily that your coach was vocally sharing the gospel. I mean, he may have said some principles and thrown some things out there that you just didn't know yet, and then you kind of look back, but
He may have, and I just totally missed it.
Yeah,
he may have been sharing the gospel the whole time and just had no idea.
Yeah, but just the way that you live your life is so cool, because that in itself is a huge testament to sharing the gospel. And so because you saw what it looked like to be, maybe a godly father, a godly coach, him living that out, you just had that respect for him. Maybe you didn't know exactly why, but he was a trustworthy person. He was living out the gospel. And then that planted that seed, and God just continued to grow that seed. You get to Oklahoma, you hear the gospel, and all of a sudden it just starts to click for you. So that's the huge takeaway that I get from that, is sharing, living like Christ. It's not always about vocally sharing the gospel. There's always that huge walk aspect of it. You got to live out the principles, and that alone can help, be a light to your teammates on and off the field.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of times, for us to share the gospel with somebody, whether we or someone else that does it, they're expecting like, okay, now what do you want to do with that? Like, you got to respond like now. And that's tough, because that puts a lot of pressure on people, like, to be like, wow, were you just here just to try to do that and then expect me to make a response? Like, what about relationship? So that's kind of where I stand, is where he built relationship, and by his actions, we saw example of the gospel being shared by his actions. And I know, I mean, he shared, all kinds of biblical principles and stuff all the time, but it was by his actions, building that relationship, building that trust with each other. That's the thing that's just like, when I talk to my kids, or if I share any testimony with younger kids, it's just, yes, we need to be able to be ready to share the gospel, with others, but we need to build relationships. Like, that's so important, is building relationships, and he did that, and that was probably the biggest thing for me, was when I look back, is he didn't have this thing, well, I'm going to be a coach to see how many kids I can get, to enter salvation. It was, it's like, I'm going to build relationships, and then God is going to do the work from there, and stuff. And so that's been the cool thing. And then he's had a long, illustrious college coaching career and stuff. And he's actually here, the head coach at Ottawa University, Arizona. And making an impact over there, with kids and stuff, doing at the end of his career pretty much what he was doing at the beginning. So it's been really neat to see that. But the relationships, and that's what he had with the OU coaches, the ones that moved to OU. He had a great relationship with them. Ended up having a great relationship with them, and so you just see that, just like, man, that's just always been an example for me, is like, as building a relationship of trust with the Lord and being able to go off of that when, the Spirit is like kind of nudging me towards something. It's just, it might be a little scary, I'm not really sure about that, but to know it's like, man, this is all built off relationship. And, because just real quick, like my brother and I didn't have a dad growing up. That's maybe another story for another time, but we didn't have a father relationship in our lives growing up. So my coaches, my grandpa, who we lived with, because my mom worked for the Los Angeles Police Department and had weird hours, so our grandpa was like our father figure, but then coaches became like father figures for us. So that's where Tim Montez, where he comes into play big time, because he was the coach that probably made the most impact on me besides my grandpa. And so he's a special person to me, and always has been.
Yeah, well, and you just think of the fruits of that one person. I mean, you could go down that whole line of, he just impacted one person. That one person now impacts 5 people, and then it just goes down. So you see yourself, and then I actually have a buddy who coached at Ottawa University with him, and then he started a high school program. And so now it's cool to see him learn those lessons from that guy. Now he starts a new high school program on the edge of town, and then you just all of a sudden see that multiply, and people just living for Christ and growing in those kids. And so many times these kids just need someone to say, I believe in you, and I'm in your corner no matter what. And that's huge for an athlete mentally, to play in that freedom of, I can go out here and compete, and if I make an error, if I make a mistake, I give up a home run, it's going to happen, but you bounce back faster than someone that's playing fearful, or that they're going to get yanked or, screamed at every time on the field. But so getting into your MLB career, I mean, you had quite the career with a few different teams. You had just remarkable teammates. I mean, you played, you look at the accolades on some of these guys, Barry Bonds, Lance Berkman, some of those guys.
Chipper Jones.
What were some of the guys, 2 or 3, that stood out to you specifically? One from a sports side, but 2, were there any like faith giants that you really cling to or really helped you in your faith?
Yeah. I'll do this from the sports side, and then I'll touch on just, going in order. Like, so with the Giants, when I first got there, Barry Bonds, obviously just probably the most unbelievable hitter, I think any of us have ever seen in the modern era. And so it was really fun to watch. But then we had other all-stars, Jeff Kent was, amazing player.
He's good on Survivor too. I don't know if you watched that.
Yeah, I saw that. I would say that was a real surprise that he actually did that. And I think he surprised a lot of people, but because he was always pretty quiet, but reserved. But I mean, thinking for me, the catchers that I got to throw to, some young guys that ended up going other places and having a lot of success, and then throwing to guys like Benito Santiago, Pudge Rodriguez, stuff like that. And so, and then as well as young guys that made a name for themselves, but like on the Giants, besides Barry, Rob Nen, who was a closer for us, that was probably the first time that I had seen someone that had like next level focus and next level mental strength. He was very impressive. I mean, so back then, the radar guns are different and all that stuff, but back then he was throwing, 97, 98 miles an hour with an unreal slider. And the way they talk about guys nowadays, I'm like, listen, if you can't forget guys like Rob, the way that he threw so hard and was able to throw the ball pretty much where he wanted, and then he had the most unbelievable slider that anybody's ever seen. And I was just like, those things. I was like, I don't want people to forget guys like him. And then the fact that the focus, the determination, he just wanted just to win. So he was very impressive for me, and I got to talk to him about his mental makeup and stuff like that, where he learned it and all that stuff, and so that was really cool. I got to play with JT Snow, probably the most unbelievable first baseman that I think anybody has ever seen. I mean, the things that he could do is unbelievable.
Saving kids' lives on the field too.
Saving Dusty, the manager's life. Dusty Baker's kid, Darren, and stuff like that. And so, but then I got to play with Greg Maddux, John Smoltz, Chipper Jones, Andrew Jones, Gary Sheffield, Vinny Castilla, Julio Franco.
Yeah.
I mean, guys like that, and I mean, so many others. All-stars and now Hall of Famers, and just unbelievable players, and learned so much from them. Got to play for Dusty Baker, Bobby Cox, and the coaching staffs, or the coaches on the coaching staff were just really good players as well, some of them, and then going forward, like I said, in the Astros, playing with like Berkman, and Pudge Rodriguez, and stuff like that, to where it's just, I look back and I'm just like, this is really cool to be able to kind of see all the guys that I got to play with and learn from, not just play with them, but learn from. And, that's really, learning from the coaches, from those players, and just learning how to study the game. That's why when I was able to be healthy, that I was able to be successful, because of all of that mixed together. And as far as like, players that, had a great fellowship with, that encouraged me, that helped me in my walk, that, developed deep, intimate relationships with, Oro Hershiser, my first year, really took me under his wing and taught me a lot, but he was very impactful for me as someone that is towards the end of his career. I think he only played maybe 1 year after that, and was willing to share pretty much everything that he's learned throughout the years, even though it was like drinking out of a fire hose. Still, it was just the fact that he took the time to do that. He took me to dinner, he took me golfing, he just sat with me. I watched him work, to try to stay ready and stuff like that. He was 42 at the time, and I'm 24, I believe, and so 23. And so to see the work that he put in, to stay ready, I was like, he's been doing this for a long time. And so so very impressive to watch. And so he was probably the most impactful person for me right away. Then after that, just kind of had guys sprinkle in and out. But I was able to become, I guess, one of the, leaders, Christian leaders on the team, eventually. And plus, when you're having success too, that helps. So, but I mean, that was really neat, And then myself and another player from, at the time, he was with the A's. Because that's when like fellowship days were starting, kind of a few years before that, in like St. Louis and one or two other places. And so myself and Sal Fasano, who was the catcher for the A's at the time, because of the Bay Area connection, we were like, man, how cool would that be if we were able to do that for like the Bay Area game, after the game, share a testimony, two guys and all that stuff. And so we asked one of the people from the Giants, Bobby Evans, who eventually became assistant GM, then a GM for them, and he was real huge in helping us to get that. And so we had it scheduled, and then we had to reschedule for a later date with the Rockies. Well, and this is the cool way that God works, is that so it's like kind of like, well, Sal, we won't be able to do this together and all that
Yeah.
stuff and all that stuff. But the fact that we're getting to do it in San Francisco was huge. So, fast forward and all that. Next thing you know, Sal gets traded to the Rockies. And so we're doing this fellowship day, and he's able to do that. So we got to tell that story of just how that worked out, and just kind of how God works, that way, and just, and so that's a really cool story, just how it started. And then they had been able to keep that up for years and years and years, and which, it started off probably 200 people, and then the next thing you know, there's thousands of people, and so it's cool stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then with the Braves, that was probably in the minor leagues, I had in AAA, AA and AAA, I had a group of guys that, super close, and we met all the time, fellowship all the time. One of them, Sean Purdy, who's Brock Purdy from the 49ers quarterback, says, it's his dad. He was my roommate in the minors for a couple of years, or for one season, and we're teammate for 2 years. And so, but with him and then a couple other guys, we had a great group. And so that really, really encouraged me going into the big leagues and helped solidify my confidence, because I was still a brand new believer, because I became a Christian my freshman year in college. And so, so I was only 3 years into it, maybe 4 years into it. And so that was huge, because it allowed me to have some confidence going into the big leagues, as far as my faith and stuff like that. So, but once I got to the Braves, I got traded to the Braves in offseason in 2002. I had guys like John Smoltz, Paul Bird, Julio Franco, eventually, like guys like Adam LaRoche. Met Adam Wainwright, was with the team, but he got traded before we got to the big leagues, but him as well. And so we just had a great group of guys and then a couple of the coaches too. And so that was tremendous fellowship. And so those guys probably are the ones that I remember most of. The ones in the minor leagues in AA, AAA, and then with the Braves is consistent. We met consistently, and probably had the biggest impact on me in my walk, and the encouragement that I received from them, and the things that I learned from them, because they were older than me, and which was really huge, And then when I went away from that, and you don't have that anymore, and I got hurt. That was really my first real big challenge, is getting hurt after I signed free agency here with Arizona. And then, I went through a rough time for a couple years, because my main focus was trying to get back to who I used to be. And so I was fully self-focused, and so it was just a rough time, as far as my walk and my relationship with the Lord and all that stuff. And people could see it. I didn't think they could, but, I'm thinking like, I'm going to try to keep it together, and but people saw it, and some said stuff, some didn't. But at the end of the day, it was like, there's just no denying like how important that fellowship is. And that's what I try to share with everybody, is just, try to find that fellowship, because trying to do it on your own is really, really hard. And it's almost impossible to be able to stay on that road, where God's leading you, when you're trying to do it by yourself. So,
and that's that consistent theme that you've talked about this whole time, is that fellowship and that relationship piece, and how important that is. And then you do get into, sign a big contract with the Diamondbacks. You come in supposed to be that guy, and then injuries come, which is a very common theme in sports. Injuries happen, whether you like it or not, and there's that consistency of, where do you find your identity? And so, it's easy to say, okay, I find my identity in Christ. But now, how do you live that out every day? And, we were talking to Robbie Ray earlier in the year at our Tales from the Dugout event, and it was that same thing. He signs a big contract with the Giants. He's rehabbing through Tommy John. You kind of have that shift of, okay, every day you have to consciously decide, my identity is rooted in Christ. Tell us a little bit. I mean, you mentioned a little bit of the mindset through that injury, but what was kind of when you get so caught up, what were you kind of going through? What was the process like? How did you kind of come out of that injury side, both mentally and physically?
Oh, man, well, like I said, it was a couple years, probably 2.5 years, where once I got injured, and it wasn't my arm, I got a stress fracture in my rib, and the Diamondbacks training staff had never dealt with something like that. So everybody was kind of like, well, let's try this. And then, as we saw progress, like, okay, I guess we're doing the right things,
Okay. Yeah.
But the fact that I wasn't able to play at first, I was like, it's okay. Injuries happen, stuff like that. I didn't do anything stupid to cause this. It's not like I wasn't taking care of myself, all that stuff. For whatever reason, it happened. And so at first I kind of was like, all right, well, let's just see how I can help maybe the younger guys, just the mental approach, just studying hitters, and just giving advice and stuff like that. And I would say that a lot of the young pitchers didn't care to get help. And I think that's one of the things that I would say maybe triggered me just to be more frustrated, because I was like, why don't you we're here to win games.
Yeah.
Like, that's what we're here for, win games. And I've learned from a lot of greats, and I'm trying to help you with information that I've learned. This is not me saying I know better than you. This is me saying, let's help each other. Let's do this together. And, unfortunately, those guys, most of them didn't last very long, but that's kind of one of the things that triggered me and set me off to, like, well, nobody wants my help, and the team has to move on, and I kind of felt like I was off on an island, like I was pushed aside. I wasn't. It just felt like that. And that's when, for me, it was just like, well, seemingly that doesn't look like anybody really cares all that much about that I'm injured. So I'm just going to think about myself, and I'm just going to try to get back and just see, this is why you signed me, type thing.
Yeah.
And, and then when people close to me are just like, are you sure you didn't do anything funny, and all that stuff. And so I was just like, okay, so now people are questioning, me. And so that's how it all started. And then the next year I came back and I was strong and healthy and stuff like that. But mechanically I was doing something that wasn't allowing me to throw as hard as I normally do. And anyways, the Diamondbacks ended up releasing me, and I went to the Orioles and got fixed. I was and started throwing hard again. But then I hardly ever pitched. They gave me a chance, but I wasn't throwing hard yet. And then they sent me to the bullpen and worked on it, and then I got fixed. And it was such a small thing. That's the thing that was so frustrating.
Yeah.
It's such a small thing, but it gives you a great example of, a lot of times, we think problems are these huge things, and sometimes it's just a little thing that we just need to kind of adjust, and then we can take off. Sometimes we need to retool all kinds of stuff, and that wasn't it. And I was just like, gosh, you got to be kidding me,
Yeah.
And so I got back, but then I was already in the bullpen and I didn't pitch much and stuff. But I was confident again. But because of where I was at, I was more confident. Like, well, now I can get back to being respected like I used to be. And so I spent 2.5 years of that, and made some bad choices, and I know I probably damaged some friendships and relationships, and my wife was like, you weren't all that great to be around, and it's like, but I was still trying to hold it together, because I was like, people know me as a Christian man, and so I can't give off the impression that I'm struggling, and that I'm pretty much have turned my back on God for a moment. And, I can't give off that impression, because then people may not, because of how things went in Arizona, here in Arizona, people weren't all that happy with me. But if they know, like, well, he's still doing good stuff, and he's still, loves people, and he's still trying to help people, maybe it won't be so bad, as opposed to, like, well, he was terrible with us and they gave him all this money and blah, blah, blah. And, he's not a very nice person, so it's like, I didn't want to do that. And so, it was a couple of years of that. And then finally I went back with the Giants, and already my forearm had started to kind of get sore, not hurt, but just sore. And once I was with the Giants, and that just kind of started, my elbow started feeling weird, and I was throwing hard and pitching great, but just started feeling weird. And then, went on the injured list for a couple times. And then the last time I came back, it just hurt too bad, and I ended up having elbow surgery. And really, I remember, I was excited about how I felt. I was going back to the Giants, where I started pitching well, and then the elbow thing hurt, and so it kind of set me back to, like, here we go again. Here we go again. And it wasn't until the very end to where I was like, well, if I blow up my elbow, I blow up my elbow. I guess I'll just be done. And and then I had to look at, like, well, the career's been, it's gone well. And so a little bit started to kind of come back to a little sense. And then but it wasn't until after I had my surgery, and then went back for my last checkup up to San Francisco, coming back, and I knew, I was just like, I'm not doing things right way, and but that last visit on the plane, I just had this unbelievable experience with God, to where it's like, and I'll just share it real quick. It's just, I get on the plane, and I knew this was my last visit, and I wasn't gonna go back to San Francisco unless something bad happened with my elbow, but I wasn't going back there. So I was coming to Arizona to stay for the rest of the off season to see if we can get healthy. Or I was going to miss the year. I was going to miss the next year. And so I was going to be in Arizona. And I was like, I don't know what the future holds and all that stuff. And so there's a lot of things up in the air. And so I get on the plane. I always get a window seat. I like the window seat. So I sit in my window seat, and there's 2 empty seats beside me. And I sit down, and immediately, like, just this rush of emotion came. And it really, well, the way that I explained it, it was just like God came and sat next to me and put down the tray and just said, like, and just was like, here's your pride, here's your selfishness, here's your ugliness, blah, blah, blah. He's showing me, like, right there on, like, the tray table, just all the ugliness. And I was like, I'm crying. So at this time I'm crying. I just boarded the plane. Everybody else is still boarding, and I'm trying to hide. And I'm just like, God, please don't let anybody sit next to me, because they see me crying and they come. What are they going to ask? Hey, are you okay? And all that stuff. And I was like, I don't want to talk to me. So, anyways, everybody loaded, and nobody sat next to me. So there was no other. I had the road to myself, and so that whole flight was, I would say, a third of it was just like, God saying, I want you to see all this, and then the last 2/3 of it was basically him saying, like, I wanted you to see this because you need to know where you're at, but I want you to know, like, I'm going to be right here with you to get rid of this, and it's like he gave me this big hug and just comfort, knowing, that he's going to be right there along with me to come back to him, So it's like the feeling of, like, you've turned your back on God at some point, and you think, well, I need to do all these things, have all these routines and stuff, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's God steps in, and he did in my life. He steps in and just says like, okay, that's enough, and then I can only imagine when it's real bad for people when God steps in and then you still run away from him, and so, but I was like, I couldn't turn away, I couldn't look away, I couldn't run away. It was like such a huge example of like love and peace and support, having my back, that it was like it was something that I couldn't continue to turn away from, and so from that experience, and then so I remember talking to a friend and my wife and stuff like that, and just sharing about things that had been going on with me, and things that I've done and all that stuff, and at the end of the day, it was just like that was a time where I was just like, well, I have to completely rely on God through this whole thing, and so that's what happened. And so it was like I was on the road to I guess feeling like on the road to really allowing God to continue to work on me, where I was resisting before, and so that really changed it all for me. That was the time that I had stopped. It was just like that's enough, that's done. And but it also makes me realize I think I hit it well enough with other people that no one ever said like, dude, what's going on, like you're not acting right, whatever. So I'm like, I think I hit it well enough to do that, and it made me think that's scary. That's scary that I could hide stuff that well, as to no one like call me out, and that was something that I really really scared me, to think like I can get to that place that us as parents, if you're parents, you're trying really to help your kids not get there, to do this, make these bad choices. And I was just like, it wasn't like it was easy to get there, but it was like, it was over time.
Yeah.
And and so but I was like, man, that's scary to think that I'm capable of my heart being that dark, and so I'm super thankful, obviously, that God was just like, all right, this is good, that's enough of that. And then ever since then, it's just been completely, it's like I've felt that was in 2006, no, 2007. That was in 2007, so for the last 17 years, it's been completely different, and it's been more like the first few years of first 10 years of my walk, where it was just like seeing God do this and do this and do this, and so that's been really cool. And then I got to finish my career with a new mindset, and I played almost a year with the Astros the next year after I got recovered from elbow surgery, and then got to play with the Dodgers for about a month, and I didn't do great, and they released me, and then I was done. And but I got a glimpse of, missing 2008 season, I got a glimpse of what retired life with the right perspective looked like. And so you talk about identity, it's like, baseball was always my identity. Even as a Christian, my identity definitely was a Christian ball player, but missing that year, having baseball taken away from me, really helped change that perspective. It's just like, I'm a ball player, but if I keep that identity as in the forefront, again, I can see how dark it can get. I've seen how dark it can get, and so I was like, I don't want that to happen again. So my identity can't be half baseball, half follower of Jesus. And so that 2007 time, was hugely impactful for me. And so when I said I was done, it was like, felt this big weight off my shoulders, because all the pressure, all the stress, all the hard work, all the, just the mental just grind and all that stuff, it was like it was done. I was like, oh man, I feel like I can breathe. And it was a great feeling, because, I got to do what I dreamt about since I was 5. And I got to do it for a long time, and I had a lot of success, had a lot of trials, had a lot of, failures, but I got to meet a lot of great people, build a lot of great relationships, and at the end of the day, I'm like, God was there for all of it. And the times that I, in a sense, went dark, I was like, he's just waiting there for me to come back to him, and he loved me so much that he was just like, okay, I'm gonna go get him, and he did that, and so ever since then, I can really truly say that all the things that we hear about the character, when it comes to the character of Jesus, his love, his care, his justice, his grace, his mercy, all that stuff is like, that became more real to me at that time, that have been able to carry, and then try to share with our kids, and then hopefully be able to share that, anytime I get to share my testimony and share that part of my testimony. So at this time in my life, I'm just like, man, just so thankful, so thankful that God intervened and stepped in. Would I wish that he did that sooner? Sure, of course. Mm-hmm. But I think I needed to go through some of that stuff to see how dark it can get, in order for me to realize like how big it is, and that, being with the Lord on a daily basis, and knowing like what that feeling is compared to being in the dark and not with him, like, one is definitely better than the other. One of my friends reminded me, coming through that, is like, you no longer look behind you to see like, am I going to be found out, and it's like, that's one of the things that I think looking back was, are people going to find me out, find,
it's that imposter syndrome.
Yeah. And, thinking that, it could happen anytime, and it didn't, but I was still wondering, looking every which way to see, like, are people gonna, turn that light on and expose me, and then being portrayed as maybe a fraud and all that stuff. And it's like, so that's a lot of stress, it's a lot of work, a lot of stress. And to be able to be freed up from that, like, like I said, that's way better than having to always look, behind you and feel and wonder if you're going to be found out, caught, that, you're, it doesn't have to be like, really bad decisions. It's just that you're just living for yourself type thing, and so it's not always like, you're doing something horrible. It's just, you're just all for yourself.
Yeah. Well, I love that testimony, because it's not one that you hear often, whether someone is still in that situation, but I think it's true for all of us. And what the enemy wants to do is he wants to isolate us, especially as men and as athletes. When something goes wrong, you turn inward and you remove yourself from group situations, and you're like, I'm just going to man up and I'm going to try and figure it out on my own. And so you isolate yourself, you cut out their relationships, you stop talking to your wife, your loved ones, because you're like so internally focused on trying to figure out whatever this thing is. And also, like, it's important to understand that the Christian life is not perfect. We're going to make mistakes, we're going to fail, we're going to screw up, and we need to be open and honest about that with our friends and our family and church, and, repenting, and praying with God. But that's the first thing that happens, is you sin, and then the enemy's like, hey, just cover it up. It's okay. It's fine. Just bury it. And then all of a sudden it just snowballs, where you just keep burying it, to where all of a sudden you don't even recognize who you are. And you get, like you were saying, you all of a sudden live this life of, oh, someone's going to find me out. Someone's going to, when you just kind of got to flip it around, whereas you know that you're going to mess up. And sometimes people have issues with the church too, because they've been burned by a church or someone in the church. And it's tough because you do have to understand that the church is just sinful people just like everyone else. And we're all just striving to get better and to become more like Christ. And we're going to hurt people. We're going to make mistakes, but it's that repentance and trying to, ask for forgiveness and trying to be better. And so thank you for opening up about that. I'm sure it's, even those lessons that you've learned are now the people listening to these episodes. I'm sure there's at least a couple of them that are going through some of the same things you are. So thank you for being open and being willing to pour into those people's lives.
No, I mean, I think it's so important to be able to, for me, to share some of this stuff, because it helps me understand like that was real. And, there's no need to shy away from it, because I can share something and people may have their opinions, about me, and like, yeah, well, you're supposed to be a Christian in this and this and this. And it's just like, well, that just tells me like, you're not really understanding what being a follower of Jesus is all about. Like, we're not perfect people. We're all flawed in some way. But it also helps me be able to share, like, that the enemy is real, Satan's real, and for us to recognize that is hugely important, because when we think that we're, making these decisions, and usually the bad decisions come pretty easy because they're things that as Christians we're just like, I shouldn't do that, like I shouldn't want to do that. But when we get tempted or deceived or led astray that way, it's actually, in my opinion, not that hard to be like, okay, I'll do that, because that's our natural tendency is to go where we're, towards those things that we, as we grow up, we have these thoughts and temptations and stuff of just like, ooh, that would be kind of fun, And so I'm like, I actually don't think it's very hard, but that's the scary part, is that, and so if we don't notice that, if we don't understand that, then we can easily be led, led astray, be deceived. And so me being able to share it not only helps me to remember that, but yeah, my hope is that somebody else will understand, like, yeah, it wasn't hard for me to just only look out for myself and step over somebody else for my career, because, I did that for my career to help my family so that we can be financially stable, so our kids can get a good education. You can go down that line. It's like, so it wasn't hard for you to step over somebody else because you thought you were doing it. It's like, but in reality, it's like you manipulated some other person and stepped over them, in order to do all these things. And, it's like, it wasn't that hard of a decision sometimes to do that. So it's like, that's kind of the thing that I hope, anybody gets out of it, is like, I had to learn that, and I had to come to understand that. And so to understand that, sin, living a life of just, where you're doing sin after sin after sin, is actually not that challenging. The real challenge, and the thing that really takes courage, is to stay away from doing those things and hold off from doing those things. That's because that's the harder thing to me, in my opinion. Is like, that's the harder thing, is to say no to those things, because our sinful natures is going to be attracted to those things, and it's really not that hard just to decide to do everything that your heart desires, And so, but that's the big difference, is like, as followers of Jesus, is like that our heart has been changed. And so now the work is to have our heart's desire to be for what God has for us, and what, he says is good, and where he wants us to go. That's more of a challenge, because there's discipline in that.
Yeah.
There's humility in that. And, it's really hard, but when we're selfish people by nature, I mean, gosh, there was all kinds of bad stuff floating around, minor leagues and major leagues and in the clubhouses and stuff. And it's like, it took a lot of discipline and a lot of us having each other's back to not get involved in that kind of stuff. And so, in the end, it was just like, man, that's why it's so crucial to have that fellowship, I just can't say it enough that, you need that fellowship to find those people that have the same desires as you do and be able to latch on to each other, and do that, And so at this time, at my age, with the age of our kids that we have, I'm seeing how big of a challenge it is for them because of all the things that they have right there in front of them compared to what I had at their age, I didn't have a phone. I didn't have, that access to, to a lot of stuff that's not healthy. And so in a sense, it was a little easier to deal with that. And so, they've had a hard time. And so, so to be able to share my story and be honest with it and the things that I went through, things I decided to do, things that God did by intervening, and the things I can continue to see Him do in me and then around me. It's important, I think, for me to share that and be honest with that for our kids, and then hopefully anybody else that may struggle with that may not understand why certain things are happening to them and all that, and feeling like I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. I don't know how I'm going to get back to that strong relationship with the Lord and stuff. So my little story there, my little experience, and I'm just like, I just think I know I've heard that in other people's testimonies, and so when I think about my experience, I'm like, that's something I didn't understand in other people's stories because I hadn't gone through it. But now it totally makes sense, just like about how great God is and how much He loves us. And that's never been more real for me than, after that experience.
Yeah, that's good. And it's just that openness. And, like you're saying with your kids and social media, you can get into stuff so fast these days. And so that's the whole point of this podcast, is to use platforms. I mean, when people see, MLB All-Star, all these things, that kind of grabs their attention, but then to hear how real you are, and like people tend to put athletes on a pedestal of, they're heroes, they want to be like them, they just think of all the accolades, but they're people just like all of us. They go through the same things, and then to hear someone like yourself open up about that time in the playing days and the struggles that you've gone through, it's so encouraging and life-giving to these kids that are trying to, follow someone's footsteps. And then to hear you talk about your relationship with Jesus and the fellowship, and encourages them to find that at their high school, their junior high, wherever they're at, to start building those principles. So it's been such a pleasure, having you today and being able to talk through some of these things. It's kind of like a last parting shot for those listening. What are some of the things you're involved in now, or how can people kind of stay up if they want to learn more about you or things you're involved in? How can they do that?
Yeah, so since I retired in 2010, like, man, I've been really, really busy with all kinds of stuff. It's just like, man, why am I so busy? But mostly, try to be involved with our kids' school. They go to Faith Christian School, and so it's just a little school that all three of our kids have gone through, and we just have great relationship with people there. And so my wife played volleyball at Oklahoma, so we've been helping out coaching, some of their teams sometimes, and but just being supportive parents there at the school, being helping hands and things like that. And my wife's been on the board. I've been athletic director there and stuff. So that's really the main thing. And, before that, I had a golf apparel brand for about 8 years called 2GG Apparel, stands for Second Guy Golf, Second Girl Golf. And we gave 100% of our proceeds to charity. So that was really cool experience. That was hard, but at the same time, it was very rewarding, because of what we got to do. Golf is my second love after baseball. And so to be able to do something in the golf space and create apparel that, we kind of come up with, and people actually buy it, and then be able to give checks to some great charities, some great organizations that are helping other people a lot, was really rewarding. And then coming out of that too is just the relationships, that we built, and that I still have to this day. So, currently I have felt like this past year that really got us, because people always ask me, like, are you coaching, are you involved in baseball? And it's always been no, because I was like, I want to be home for my kids. Having success in the major leagues has allowed me to be there for my wife and my kids every day. And our last kid, our son, he's a sophomore in high school, so we're almost done with that. Almost empty nesters, but. So really, the Lord's put on my heart to be able to try to get into the game, more on the baseball strategy, pitching strategy side and stuff. And so I'm hoping that there's something there, for next season. And so that's kind of where my focus is at. We're me and two other guys, Tim Montez, who I mentioned before, looking to start something that has to do with pitching, for four pitchers, that's, we think is different than what you're seeing out there. It's more based off of just purely pitching, and we're not going to we wouldn't try to show people how to throw 100 miles an hour or anything like that, or these wicked sliders and all that stuff. Like, we're not about that, because there's more to pitching than just that. And especially the younger kids, they need a solid foundation, just like Tim gave me a solid foundation. And so, and it's all rooted in the heart to just help, just to love on people and help them, let them see what I saw in Tim back in high school, that the impact he made, and that hopefully we can be that same kind of impact on other people. And so we're hoping to start that. There's a lot of stuff we need to put together for that, but so hopefully that will be coming soon as well. But yeah, so right now just trying to figure out how I can, speak to some organizations where I feel like I can add value, to their pitching strategy department and development department, and so we'll see about that. And otherwise, I get to play a lot of charity golf events and help out there. So the last couple of years I've been able to do more than I ever have, and so it's been great. Get to go travel a little bit and do all that, and trying to keep my golf game. I'm right at scratch, and so I'm trying to keep my golf game there as much as I can,
Wow. Okay.
And so, because that's probably one of the little things right now is like I get so frustrated when I shoot 78, and sometimes I have to check myself and say, like, that's not a bad score. Like,
not at all.
What am I getting so frustrated about? So I'm like, if I don't shoot 72 or 74, then something's wrong. And so I have to watch that, because I've gotten really mad over the years about golf, and I end the round, I'm like, what's my problem? Like, that's just. So it's that's been a problem for years that I've had to try to conquer, but yeah. So life has been great, these last couple of years, especially because been able to be available for our daughter who she graduated already college, but she's out living her life and trying to be a working actor and out in California, and then our other daughter, just being able to see her and what she's doing. She's going to Arizona Christian, and she's on the worship team there. And
awesome. And
so if I had a regular job and was doing stuff, like, it'd be really hard to experience that stuff. And then like with our son, and he's in scouts, and And so I wouldn't be available for that, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, these last couple of years have been really special, you know.
That's cool.
And again, I go all the way back to, you know, having someone like Tim Montez and then our head coach, but Tim, especially with pitching, you know, helped to set that foundation back in 1991, you know, 92, and then just seeing like the trail from, you know, that it led to or led down, and the experiences. And it's like, man, you know, my enjoyment that I've had, especially the last couple years, because I haven't, you know, I ended the golf apparel brand, and, you know, I wasn't the school athletic director and all that stuff, and just kind of just being there and doing nothing. It's been really nice because it's afforded me to really reflect and look back, and then be able to share that with not only our kids, but with my son especially, since he's, you know, been 13, 14, now 15 years old, where it's, you know, he's in kind of the prime years of his teens to really learn how to take ownership of his own walk with Jesus, and then, you know, learning how to become an adult, you know, be a man, and what that means and all that stuff. And so these last 2 years, especially with him, has been really awesome, because we've been able to spend a ton of time and just to see our relationship change and grow and strengthen and all that stuff. And it's been really neat. And so that's why I say, it's like, man, if I was involved in other stuff just that I wanted to do, you know, and it was away or work, you know, doing off with an organization or whatever, and I was gone, you know, that's kind of some of the stuff I'd be missing out on. And that's what really keeps me, I think, humble enough to say, like, you know, I don't have it all figured out. You know, I'm no expert at anything, but because God gave me a skill, and that He put the right people in my life to help me hone that skill to get it to the highest level, and then be successful at the highest level. This produced me to be able to have that time, that freedom of time to spend with the people that are most important to me. And this is where we're at now. And so in a couple of years from now, it'll just be my wife and I, and, you know, so we'll have to decide again, like, what's going on. So, but right now, it's just been, the last couple of years been a real special time.
Cool.
It's been really cool and necessary for me to be there for many different reasons. So I'm just so super thankful, you know, for that. So
Awesome.
hopefully, if I get with an organization, that would be great, because we prayed about it, and so we're prepared for that. But if I don't, then it's okay, you know, because the worst that can happen is I get to spend more time with my family. So that's not a bad thing, you know. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what transpires.
That's awesome. Well, let me pray for us, and
Thanks.
then we can close this out.
Thank you.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the time here with Russ, and just to hear his heart, and just the unique situations and stories that you have helped walk him through, God, just to become the person that he is today, and the encouragement he is to all those listening and all those involved in his life, God. Pray for himself and his family, that you will keep them safe, and continue growing in you, and becoming a light wherever they're at, and whatever you have in store for him, God, that you'll just help them be open to what you're calling them to do, and lead them in the way that you want them to go. And thank you for his impact and his story, and all the people that will be impacted through hearing this. And we pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen.